In recent years, there has been a growing emphasis on diversity and inclusion across various sectors of society, from corporate boardrooms to political institutions and entertainment industries. While the goal of promoting diversity is laudable, it often gives rise to a superficial practice known as tokenism. Tokenism occurs when an organization or individual makes only a symbolic effort to be inclusive, giving the appearance of equality and diversity without committing to genuine structural or cultural change. Tokenism typically involves the inclusion of a small number of people from underrepresented groups, in a way that is more about optics than actual empowerment. It's a box-ticking exercise that serves to protect an organization from criticism while avoiding any meaningful action toward addressing systemic inequality. Whether in the workplace, politics, or media, tokenism is about creating the illusion of diversity, not the reality. For example, a company may hire one woman or one person of color into a senior leadership role while maintaining a majority of white men in the highest positions. By pointing to this one hire, the company can claim to be diverse, even though the overall power structure remains unchanged. This form of tokenism not only fails to address the root causes of inequality, but can also reinforce stereotypes and exacerbate the marginalization of the very people it purports to uplift. Tokenism is dangerous because it gives the false impression that progress is being made when, in fact, little has changed. It allows organizations to present themselves as progressive while avoiding the hard work of dismantling discriminatory practices and creating truly inclusive environments. In this video, we'll explore the concept of tokenism, its psychological and societal implications, and how it manifests in various sectors. We'll also discuss ways to recognize and challenge tokenism in order to foster genuine inclusion and equity. To understand why tokenism is so prevalent, we need to delve into the psychological mechanisms that drive this phenomenon. Tokenism often arises from a desire to appear inclusive without actually addressing the deep-seated biases that exist within organizations or institutions. There are several psychological factors that contribute to the persistence of tokenism, both for those who engage in it and those who experience it. One of the main reasons tokenism persists is because it creates the illusion of progress. By making a superficial effort to include underrepresented groups, organizations can present themselves as champions of diversity without making any substantial changes to their practices or culture. This allows individuals and organizations to feel good about themselves, believing that they are contributing to positive social change, even though they are only scratching the surface of the problem. This illusion of progress is particularly appealing in industries or sectors where there is public pressure to be inclusive. For example, after facing criticism for a lack of diversity, a tech company might promote one woman to an executive position and then point to this hire as evidence that they are addressing gender inequality. However, this token effort does not address the underlying barriers that prevent women from advancing in the company, such as biased hiring practices, pay inequity, or a lack of mentorship opportunities. By creating the illusion of inclusion, tokenism allows the organization to deflect criticism without committing to real change. Another psychological factor that contributes to tokenism is cognitive dissonance, the discomfort people feel when their actions or beliefs are inconsistent with their values. Many individuals and organizations like to think of themselves as fair and inclusive, but their actions may not align with these ideals. Tokenism offers a way to resolve this cognitive dissonance by allowing people to justify their lack of meaningful action while still maintaining a positive self-image. For example, a company may recognize that its leadership is overwhelmingly composed of men, but feel uncomfortable confronting the systemic reasons for this lack of diversity. By promoting one woman to a leadership role, the company can alleviate this discomfort and convince itself that it is doing enough to address the problem, even though the structural barriers to gender equity remain in place. This process of self-justification allows individuals and organizations to avoid confronting their own biases and failings. Stereotype threat and marginalization. For the individuals who are selected as tokens, the experience can be psychologically damaging due to the phenomenon of stereotype threat. Stereotype threat occurs when individuals from marginalized groups fear that their actions will confirm negative stereotypes about their group. In the context of tokenism, this fear is heightened because the token individual is often placed under intense scrutiny and expected to represent their entire group. For example, a woman who is promoted to a leadership position as a token may feel immense pressure to succeed, knowing that her performance will be used as a yardstick to judge the capabilities of all women. This pressure can lead to stress and anxiety, making it more difficult for the individual to perform at their best. If the token individual fails or struggles, their failure is often attributed to their identity rather than to systemic factors, reinforcing stereotypes and further marginalizing their group. In addition to stereotype threat, token individuals may also experience marginalization within their organizations. While they are included in name or position, they are often excluded from meaningful decision-making processes and remain on the periphery of power. This creates a paradox where the token individual is visible as a symbol of diversity, but invisible in terms of real influence. As a result, tokenism can exacerbate feelings of isolation and disempowerment among those it claims to uplift. Tokenism is especially prevalent in the workplace, where organizations are increasingly under pressure to demonstrate their commitment to diversity and inclusion. While many companies have made strides toward increasing representation, tokenism remains a significant barrier to achieving true equality in the workplace. Let's explore how tokenism manifests in professional settings and its impact on both individuals and organizational culture. One of the most common examples of tokenism in the workplace is the diversity hire, where an individual from an underrepresented group is hired or promoted not because of their qualifications or potential, but to fulfill a diversity quota or create the appearance of inclusivity. The diversity hire is often celebrated by the organization as a sign of progress, even though little has changed in terms of the company's overall demographics or culture. For example, a law firm might hire one black lawyer and then showcase this individual in promotional materials, positioning them as proof that the firm is committed to diversity. However, if the firm's leadership remains overwhelmingly white and male, and if the black lawyer is not given the same opportunities for advancement as their peers, the hire becomes a token gesture rather than a step toward genuine inclusion. Diversity hires who are brought in as tokens often face additional challenges, including being held to higher standards than their colleagues or being expected to represent their entire group. This can create a hostile work environment where the individual feels isolated and under constant pressure to prove their worth. Lack of real power. Another hallmark of tokenism in the workplace is that the individuals who are included as tokens are often given little real power or influence. While they may hold positions with impressive titles, they are frequently excluded from key decision-making processes and relegated to symbolic roles. This allows the organization to point to their presence as evidence of diversity without actually empowering them to make meaningful contributions. For example, a company might appoint a woman to its board of directors, but ensure that her role is largely ceremonial, with little input into the company's strategic direction. This token appointment gives the appearance of progress, but the power dynamics within the organization remain unchanged. The burden of representation. Tokenism in the workplace also places an unfair burden on the individuals who are selected as tokens. These individuals are often expected to act as spokespersons for their entire group, representing the experiences and perspectives of all people from that group, even though no single person can embody the diversity of an entire demographic. For example, a Latina employee in a predominantly white workplace may be expected to provide input on all matters related to Latinx culture, even if she is not an expert on those issues. This expectation creates additional emotional labor for the token individual, who must navigate the complexities of representing their group while also managing their own career and responsibilities. This burden of representation can be exhausting and isolating, as the token individual is often the only person from their group in the room. Instead of fostering a sense of belonging, Tokenism reinforces the idea that the individual is an outsider who has been included for appearances rather than because of their unique talents or perspectives. Tokenism is also a significant issue in the political sphere, where governments and political parties often make token gestures toward diversity without committing to policies that address systemic inequality. While it is important to have diverse representation in political institutions, tokenism undermines the goal of genuine inclusion by using individuals from underrepresented groups as symbols rather than empowering them to enact meaningful change. In politics, one of the most common forms of tokenism is the symbolic appointment of individuals from marginalized groups to high-profile positions. These appointments are often made to signal to the public that the government or political party is committed to diversity, but the individuals appointed may lack the power or support necessary to influence policy in a meaningful way. For example, a political party might appoint a person of color to a cabinet position to demonstrate its commitment to racial equality. But if that individual is not given the resources, authority, or support to implement policies that address racial disparities, the appointment becomes a token gesture rather than a meaningful step toward change. The individual may be celebrated as a symbol of progress, but without real power or influence, their ability to address systemic issues is limited. This kind of tokenism can also occur when marginalized individuals are appointed to roles that are symbolic but disconnected from the key decision-making processes in government. For example, a government might create a position focused on diversity and inclusion and appoint a person of color or a woman to that role, but the position may have little influence over major policy decisions or budget allocations. While the appointment looks good on the surface, it fails to address the structural inequalities that perpetuate discrimination and exclusion in society. Another form of tokenism in politics is the token candidate, where political parties recruit candidates from underrepresented groups to run in elections primarily for symbolic purposes. These candidates are often placed in districts where they have little chance of winning, allowing the party to claim that they are committed to diversity without actually changing the makeup of their leadership or legislative body. For example, a political party might select a woman or a person of color to run in a heavily contested or unwinnable district, knowing that the candidate is unlikely to succeed. By doing this, the party can point to their effort to promote diversity without having to make real changes to their leadership or policies. Token candidates are often used as a way to attract votes from marginalized communities or to appease public pressure for greater diversity. However, because these candidates are not given the support or resources necessary to win, their inclusion becomes a symbolic gesture rather than a genuine effort to change the political landscape. In addition to symbolic appointments and token candidates, tokenism in politics can also manifest in the form of token policies, superficial or performative actions taken by governments to signal a commitment to diversity without addressing the underlying issues of inequality. These policies are often designed to deflect criticism or to gain political support without making substantial changes to the status quo. For example, a government might implement a diversity initiative that focuses on increasing representation in certain sectors or agencies, but does not address the systemic barriers that prevent marginalized groups from accessing those opportunities in the first place. These token policies give the appearance of progress while allowing the structural inequalities that perpetuate discrimination to remain intact. In some cases, token policies are accompanied by highly visible public campaigns or announcements that draw attention to the government's supposed commitment to diversity. However, these efforts often lack the funding, resources, or enforcement mechanisms needed to create real change. As a result, tokenism in politics can reinforce the status quo while giving the illusion of progress. Tokenism is especially prevalent in the media and entertainment industries, where representation has become a hot-button issue in recent years. While there have been significant calls for greater diversity in film, television, and advertising, tokenism remains a major problem. as many companies and productions focus on superficial inclusion rather than meaningful representation. The token character. In film and television, one of the most recognizable forms of tokenism is the token character. A character from a marginalized group who is included in the cast primarily to create the appearance of diversity. Token characters are often given little depth or development, and their presence in the story is typically secondary to the main, often white male characters. For example, a television show might include a single black character in an otherwise white cast, but this character may lack a compelling storyline or may be stereotyped as a one-dimensional figure. The inclusion of the token character allows the show to claim diversity without making any real effort to reflect the complexity of marginalized identities or experiences. Token characters can also be used as comic relief, sidekicks, or background figures, reinforcing stereotypes and limiting their importance in the narrative. In many cases, token characters are portrayed as supporting the main, white characters, rather than having their own independent arcs or agency. This superficial representation does little to challenge the status quo or to promote real inclusion in media. The diversity quota. In response to calls for greater diversity in casting and storytelling, some media companies and studios have implemented diversity quotas, policies that require a certain percentage of people from underrepresented groups to be included in productions. While diversity quotas can be a useful tool for increasing representation, they can also lead to tokenism if they are applied in a superficial or performative way. For example, a film production might hire 1 or 2 actors of color to meet a diversity quota, but fail to give these actors meaningful roles or storylines. Similarly, a studio might promote a diversity initiative by casting women in lead roles, but continue to hire predominantly male directors and producers behind the scenes. In these cases, the focus on meeting the quota becomes more about optics than about creating real opportunities for marginalized groups. While diversity quotas can help open doors for underrepresented actors and creators, they can also lead to resentment if the individuals hired are seen as tokens rather than valued contributors. Tokenism can reinforce the perception that diversity is being imposed for appearance's sake, rather than as a reflection of the genuine talent and contributions of marginalized individuals. Whitewashing and token representation. Tokenism in media can also take the form of whitewashing, where roles or stories that should be centered on people from marginalized groups are instead given to white actors or characters. This is particularly common in film adaptations of books, comics, or historical events, where characters of color are rewritten as white. For example, a film adaptation of a story about a historical figure of color might cast a white actor in the role, erasing the identity and experience of the original figure. This form of tokenism reinforces the dominance of white narratives in media, while marginalizing the contributions of people of color. At the same time, tokenism can occur when characters from marginalized groups are included in the story, but are given little depth or complexity. These token representations serve as a superficial nod to diversity, without challenging the structural inequalities that continue to exclude people from underrepresented groups from positions of power in the entertainment industry. Chapter 5. The consequences of tokenism. While tokenism may seem like a well-meaning effort to promote diversity, its consequences are far-reaching and damaging, both for the individuals who are included as tokens and for society as a whole. Let's explore some of the key consequences of tokenism and why it falls short of creating real change. Reinforcing stereotypes. One of the most damaging consequences of tokenism is that it often reinforces stereotypes rather than challenging them. By including individuals from marginalized groups in a superficial way, tokenism can perpetuate the very stereotypes it claims to combat. Token characters in media, token hires in the workplace, and token appointments in politics often fall into stereotypical roles that limit their complexity and reinforce existing power dynamics. For example, a television show might include a black character who is portrayed as a sidekick or comic relief, reinforcing the stereotype that black individuals are not central to important narratives. Similarly, a token woman in a corporate boardroom may be expected to embody traditional gender roles, such as being nurturing or empathetic, rather than being seen as a leader in her own right. These stereotypes can be internalized by both the token individuals and the broader public, leading to further marginalization and exclusion. Instead of challenging the status quo, tokenism often reinforces the idea that people from marginalized groups are only included for appearance's sake and are not capable of holding real power or making meaningful contributions. Undermining authentic representation. Another consequence of tokenism is that it undermines authentic representation by reducing individuals from marginalized groups to symbols rather than full participants in the conversation. When people are included as tokens, their identities and experiences are often oversimplified or ignored, preventing them from being seen as multidimensional individuals with unique perspectives. For example, a person of color who is hired as a token in a predominantly white workplace may feel pressure to conform to the dominant culture rather than being able to express their authentic self. This can create a disconnect between the individual's identity and their role within the organization, leading to feelings of isolation and disempowerment. Similarly, token representation in media often fails to reflect the full diversity of marginalized groups, focusing on narrow or stereotypical portrayals rather than complex, authentic stories. This lack of authentic representation can perpetuate harmful narratives and limit opportunities for people from marginalized groups to see themselves reflected in meaningful ways. Creating resentment. Tokenism can also create resentment among both the individuals who are included as tokens and the broader community. For the token individuals themselves, being included in a superficial way can lead to feelings of tokenism and a sense that they are not valued for their actual contributions or abilities. For example, a woman who is promoted to a leadership role as a token may feel that her success is not based on merit, but on her identity as a woman. This can lead to self-doubt and a lack of confidence in her abilities, as well as frustration with an organization that is more focused on appearances than on real inclusion. At the same time, tokenism can create resentment among other members of the organization or community who feel that diversity is being imposed for appearance's sake, rather than as a reflection of genuine talent or merit. This can lead to tension and division, further undermining efforts to create an inclusive environment.
Recognizing and challenging tokenism is essential for creating real, lasting change that goes beyond superficial gestures of inclusion. By identifying the signs of tokenism and advocating for more meaningful representation, we can move toward a society where diversity is truly valued and supported. Look beyond the optics. The first step in recognizing tokenism is to look beyond the optics and examine the deeper dynamics at play. Ask yourself, is this individual being included in a meaningful way, or are they being used as a symbol of diversity without real influence or power? Is the organization or institution making structural changes to support inclusion, or is it merely fulfilling a quota or making a gesture to avoid criticism? For example, if a company hires one person from an underrepresented group and points to that hire as evidence of its commitment to diversity, it's important to ask whether that individual is given opportunities for advancement, whether the company has policies in place to support equity, and whether the company is taking steps to address the root causes of underrepresentation. If the answer is no, the hire may be an example of tokenism rather than genuine inclusion. Similarly, in media, it's important to ask whether characters from marginalized groups are given fully developed roles and storylines, or whether they are included simply to tick a diversity box. Are these characters portrayed as complex individuals with agency, or are they reduced to stereotypes or background figures? By looking beyond surface-level representation, we can better identify when tokenism is at play. Examine who holds power. Tokenism often involves including individuals from marginalized groups in visible roles while keeping the real power and decision-making authority in the hands of a homogeneous group. To recognize tokenism, it's important to examine who holds power in an organization or institution. For example, in a company that claims to value diversity, look at the makeup of the leadership team, the board of directors, and the individuals who have the most influence over decisions. If these positions are overwhelmingly held by people from privileged groups, while individuals from underrepresented groups are placed in symbolic or low-power roles, tokenism may be at play. In media, it's important to consider not only the diversity of the cast, but also the diversity. Are people from marginalized groups shape the narrative, or are they confined to token roles with little creative control? By examining who holds power, we can better understand whether organizations ask about intent and impact. Another way to recognize tokenism is to ask about the intent and impact of inclusion efforts. Is the goal of inclusion to create real opportunities for marginalized groups? Or is it to protect the organization from criticism or to attract a certain audience? Is the inclusion effort driven by a genuine desire to address systemic inequality? Or is it a performative gesture designed to improve public perception? For example, if a company launches a diversity initiative but fails to provide the necessary resources, support, or follow through to make the initiative effective, the intent may be more about optics than about creating real change. Similarly, if a political party appoints a token candidate or makes a symbolic gesture toward diversity but continues to promote policies that perpetuate inequality, the impact of that gesture is likely to be superficial. By asking about the intent and impact of inclusion efforts, we can better differentiate between genuine efforts to promote equity and performative tokenism. Challenge tokenism in conversations and actions. Once tokenism is recognized, it's important to challenge it in conversations and actions. This can involve speaking up when you see tokenism in your workplace, school, or community, and advocating for more meaningful inclusion efforts. It can also involve pushing for changes to the policies, structures, and practices that allow tokenism to persist. For example, if you work in a company where tokenism is prevalent, you might advocate for changes to the hiring and promotion processes to ensure that individuals from underrepresented groups are given real opportunities for advancement. You might also push for the creation of mentorship programs, diversity training, and other initiatives that address the systemic barriers that prevent marginalized individuals from thriving in the organization. In media, challenging tokenism might involve calling out superficial representation and advocating for more complex, authentic portrayals of marginalized characters. This could include supporting media that centers the stories of people from underrepresented groups and pushing for greater diversity among creators, writers, and decision makers in the entertainment industry. By challenging tokenism and advocating for more meaningful inclusion, we can help create a society where diversity is not just about appearances, but about real opportunities and equity. Inclusion. Moving beyond tokenism toward genuine inclusion. Tokenism may provide the appearance of progress, but it ultimately falls short of creating real, lasting change. By focusing on superficial inclusion rather than addressing the root causes of inequality, tokenism reinforces stereotypes, marginalizes individuals from underrepresented groups, and allows organizations and institutions to avoid the hard work of dismantling systemic discrimination. Genuine inclusion requires more than token gestures. It requires organizations, governments, media industries, and individuals to commit to creating environments where people from all backgrounds are valued, respected, and given real opportunities to contribute and succeed. This means going beyond symbolic appointments and diversity quotas and focusing on structural change, equity, and empowerment. To move beyond tokenism, we must be willing to engage in uncomfortable conversations about power, privilege, and inequality. We must be willing to examine the policies and practices that perpetuate exclusion and to push for reforms that create more inclusive spaces. This includes advocating for the representation of marginalized groups, not just in visible roles, but in positions of real power and influence. By recognizing and challenging tokenism, we can move toward a society where diversity is not just a buzzword, but a reality. A society where people from all backgrounds are not included as tokens, but as valued, respected, and empowered members of the community. Together, we can create a world where inclusion is not about optics, but about justice and equity for all.
Remember to like and subscribe for more video content. Sapiens quae vigilat.